mutilated or massacred. In Ireland, over 100 people each year are deliberately shot through the knee to cripple them for life. These kneecappings sometimes are inflicted with electric drills. The victims are not British troops or Protestant opposition. They are Catholics who have been punished for backsliding, failure to support the revolution. The killing or torture of the very people who supposedly are being liberated is an important feature of all Marxist-Leninist revolutions. It is through this tactic that the terrorists are able to frighten segments of the population into supporting them. With a sufficiently bloody campaign, a small band of terrorists can establish the equivalent of a second government over the people. They actually collect taxes. They issue laws and administer punishment to anyone who disobeys those laws. But most of all, they demand loyalty. They expect massive turnouts for their rallies, enthusiastic support of their general strikes, and they especially want the young people as eager recruits into their ranks. When these things begin to happen, the revolution is well on its way. Nothing could be more devastating to a government than to have segments of its population fall under the control of its enemy. And yet this is exactly what happens through terrorism, not as a result of military confrontation, but because of a civilian reaction to fear.
Now, the violence that we had in the 60s was limited, but the next time it would be unlimited, because the violence in the 60s was a struggle for human dignity and for human rights. The next struggle will be a struggle for survival, and it will not just be limited to black people or black against white, but it will be the poor people, the masses of the people in the country struggling for the right to live, for the right to survive.
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. We become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I ask, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill. 25 million people. Now, I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And they were dead serious.
Very few of these diplomats, journalists, trade missions and so forth very few members do not have an espionage role here in this country. They have never wavered from their objective of world domination.
Congressman Lawrence McDonald has been an outspoken advocate of improved national security, and he has devoted hundreds of pages in the congressional record to documenting the internal threat of espionage, subversion, and terrorism.
Yes, we are at war. Very definitely, we have been at war. It's an economic war, it's a war of subversion, it's a war of espionage, it's a war of ideas, and it's a war of terrorism and infiltration.
Is it as serious a war as it would be if there was an exchange of nuclear weapons?
No, it's the type of war we are in is far more sophisticated than an exchange of gunfire or nuclear weapons even, because it's a war of attack upon institutions, it's a war of an attack upon every segment of a society. It is total war.
It's foolish to send high technology. We should not trade with them. We should not send high technology. We should not enter agreements with them. We should not give them the international approval that comes with dealing with them.
John Ashbrook was first elected to the U.S. Congress in 1961. For over 2 decades, he has served as a member of the House Committee on Un-American Activities, the Internal Security Committee, and later, the Select Committee on Intelligence.
The aggressive, subversive, ongoing, conspiratorial, criminal nature of world communism. It's almost a propaganda drive on the part of our own people. If you told the American people what's really the truth in communism, what their goals are, what their tactics, their successes are, then it would make many of these peace efforts, diplomatic efforts, look very foolish. And I think the American people are smart. They're not asleep. They've just been misled by their leaders. And I think a part of our arrogance, and I can say that because I'm pro-American, I'm a patriot, but a part of our arrogance is to believe it will not happen here. America is the prize for the terrorists. America is indeed the target for the radicals, the leftists, and the communists. And what makes you think that in Italy, in France, Britain, Germany, other democratic countries, terrorism is increasingly a part of their way of life? What makes anybody think it will not come to this country? And the real concern I have is America is almost stripped naked when it comes to terrorists because of the left's success in the last 2 decades in limiting the ability of the police, the FBI, and the CIA. We will not be equipped to deal with terrorism when it comes.
Many of the laws have been eroded by Supreme Court decisions, by reinterpretations of the Supreme Court. At the same time, the Congress has not fulfilled its function of oversight. The House Internal Security Committee was disbanded by a parliamentary maneuver in early 1975. The Senate Internal Security Subcommittee has just recently been reestablished in an abbreviated form. The Attorney General's list of subversives is no longer used in hiring for government positions. You have the Internal Security Division of the Justice Department has been abolished. You have the Subversive Activities Control Board has been abolished. You have the intelligence units of metropolitan police forces have either been abolished, sometimes with files turned over to revolutionary groups, or in fully neutralized and no longer effective. We've seen the counterintelligence units of the Army, Navy, and Air Force no longer active at the local or in the domestic scene. So that the layers of protection that we had perhaps just 10 years ago today have been stripped away. It's necessary to start rebuilding those layers.
Solution to the problem of terrorism, I think, is probably threefold. First of all, I think we have to wake up. We live in a fool's paradise. We believe it can happen here. Part of the American arrogance is to think it may happen somewhere else but not happen to us. And then if it is ever visited upon us, we'll throw our hands up in the air and say, oh my, how did this happen? So awareness that it can happen here is probably the first tool. Secondly, I think we have to rebuild and strengthen the internal security apparatus in this country. We have to get back to the police, the FBI, and the CIA, the basic powers that they should have under the Constitution to protect us. The heart of the Constitution is to maintain order, domestic tranquility, and to, in effect, make impediments on our intelligence and police agencies where they cannot protect the public is wrong. And I think, thirdly, we have to recognize there's an international communist conspiracy, that there's a worldwide terrorist network, that we're living in a fool's paradise when we say we can deal with the Soviet Union. So I think education in all three areas. Education as to our responsibilities, education to what's happened in this country, and education above all to the threat to this country from without and from within.
One of the problems with the subject of terrorism is that new events are occurring daily, and it's never possible to remain completely up to date. By the time you see this program, undoubtedly there will have been more bloodshed and more human suffering almost everywhere in the world. But the pattern will not have changed. In the final analysis, the pattern of terrorism is more important than the repetitious details, because if we can recognize that pattern, we have a chance to anticipate the next development, and then hopefully to be able to do something about it. The strategy of terrorism is bizarre, but it works. It already has succeeded in many countries, and it's well into the middle or final stages of development in the rest of the world. It definitely can happen here. Our defense does not lie in specially trained military units or in new psychological techniques for negotiating with terrorists. The only way to combat terrorism is to prevent it, and that requires an efficient intelligence network. The issue is clear. We must pick up the pieces and reassemble our internal security system. The Marxist-Leninists could never succeed if their intended victims were aware of the strategy and tactics being used against them. By the same token, if these ploys remain unknown to the average person, then no amount of intelligence operations or internal security can protect us. Because innocent people, particularly among the youth who are being exposed to the theories of Marx and Lenin, will fall into the trap. And new revolutionaries will be created faster than the old ones even can be identified. So the ultimate solution lies in an informed electorate, the rock foundation of any system that hopes to remain free.